Hello, QVS US history students. I hope you had a good week for week two, and I hope you're having a good weekend. I want to discuss with you today how we are going to proceed into the next part of the unit. And I want to ensure those of you who are just joining the class or maybe just joined the class in the last few days that there is a hope in sight that you should easily be able to get caught up with the rest of us and finish Essential Unit 1 by the October 2nd deadline. So let me take you to the course page. Let me talk about where we've been and where we are going. And for those of you, again, who are just joining, I'll try to give you an entire overview of what we've done so far. Okay, so let's go to the course page. So here it is. Essentially, Unit 1 takes us from the period of American beginnings all the way up till 1783. So within the context of this unit, not only will you be looking at first contact that Europeans had with the Americas, but we will also explore the early colonial period. And along with that, the American Revolution is contained within this time period. So essentially, I've broken up the period from 1492 to 1783 into three different sections. So, for example, in week one, that represented the first part of this time period where we took a look at European colonization of the New World, beginning with Columbus's interactions with the native peoples in Hispaniola, and then going on further from that, taking a look at first contact and those first early settlements that the Spanish had in the beginning period. But then in week two, and some of you might just be starting week two, in week two, we quickly moved into British colonization of the New World, and you began to examine the first two settlements, the first one being at Jamestown, followed by the next settlement in Massachusetts. There's a fun little activity here where you have to decide if you were a colonist, where would you settle, either Jamestown or Salem. Both of them had some challenges in their early period. So it's an activity where you can make the decision in where you would settle depending on the surroundings that you would encounter in each of those respective places. I mean, the reality is the British colonies or the 13 colonies were quite different from each other depending on what region we are discussing. The New England colonies or the northern colonies tended to be more um, economic based in terms of manufacturing, and the those colonies also were more representative of nuclear families. Like if you compared the New England colonies to the southern colonies, men outnumbered women 6 to 1 in the southern colonies. Whereas in the New England colonies, that was quite different. We saw more equal representation of both sexes. People were moving in family units to New England, whereas in the South, mostly men were moving there. And we see that the South was largely concentrated on a plantation based system. So, again, in week two, that's what you're really looking at, how the British 13 colonies came to be and how different they were from each other. And that week then finishes by looking at a conflict that existed between the British colonies and the French and the Indians in what's referred to in U.S. history as the French and Indian War. It had a world counterpart called the Seven Years' War, but because this conflict in the Americas began in 1754 and didn't end until 1763, we refer to it as the French and Indian War. And it's this conflict that really set the stage for what you're going to take a look at in week 3, which is the American Revolution. After the British engaged in that conflict and defeated the French and then took on Canada, it ended up causing a lot of debt for the British. And in an effort to resolve that debt, a whole series of taxes were imposed upon the American colonists, who by this time had operated off of a system called salutary neglect, because they had had so much independence prior to these harsh impositions that were placed upon them in the formation of taxes. The colonists began to rebel off of the notion of no taxation without representation. So, in week 3, you will explore the numerous causes of the American Revolution. We'll take a look at how the Enlightenment impacted American political thought in terms of how governments are structured and what it meant to be organized under a monarchical system. You could see within the context of the American Revolution, the founding fathers were looking for radical changes in terms of the political structure that existed or that they operated under the British monarchy. So you'll take a look at the influence that the Enlightenment had on the American Revolution. You'll see how the country was divided between loyalists and patriots. The reality is that not all of the American colonists were in full support of the revolution. So you could see how they were split. I mean, one interesting figure alone is Benjamin Franklin. Franklin played such a pivotal role in the American Revolution, yet his son was a loyalist to the British crown. And after the revolution, he went back and lived in England, and the two essentially lived the rest of their lives estranged. So you'll you'll see the interesting conflict that existed within the context of who supported revolution and who supported the British crown. And then the last activity in this week will take you through the course of the war, how the war unfolded, what the major difficulties were for the colonists in fighting one of the most powerful empires on earth, and how the colonists came to eventually defeat the British in the American Revolution. That ended in 1783, and negotiations were made under the Treaty of Paris. So that's the last activity for the week. And then you can see in week 4, which I'll talk more about next week, that's the final week for the unit, where you will be able to take the unit test and engage in the A-level activity. But rest assured, those are the only 2 activities in that week. So if you are not starting week 3 tomorrow, then begin with week 1 and 2 activities, knowing that it's quite likely that you'll be able to borrow some of the time from week 4 in order to get caught up in the unit. Okay, so I hope this was helpful. I hope that you're not nervous or anxious and feeling behind, because, like I said, I know many of you have just started the course. Please contact me if you have any specific questions on any of the activities. I am happy to help. And if you need a more specific plan as to how you can get caught up, I'm happy to help with that too. Have a good week. Have fun exploring the American Revolution. I look forward to seeing your thoughts on these different topics in American history. Bye.